following is my book as it is captured on 11/3/2014. There's some evidence that it has been modified in multiple places. In this case, instead of deleting and rewriting content, it's mostly been adding content that was either never in place or was edited out of the document. I hope you enjoy what you hear. Thank you. Organized Crime Handbook: The Walkthrough of Various Families. Preface. During my years, I have had the misfortune of having numerous extreme encounters with a number of different organized crime families, some of which are not well known today. This book represents a collection of my understandings of these different systems for the understanding of those that are not a member. Each part is divided into sections such as history, structure, values, discipline, and money laundering. Each family also has an applied theory section demonstrating these theoretical descriptions in a particular context. I hope you find this information useful. White Tiger Chinese Mafia. History. The White Tiger Chinese Mafia was originally created when the Nazi CIA Russian White Tiger Mafia, created by genius Agent White Tiger, invaded China, integrating his forces with the local Daoist aristocratic rebellion groups. These rebellion groups successfully mounted an internal misdirection and control campaign against White Tiger, undercutting his authority significantly inside of China. When the Russian parent mafia was shattered by European intelligence forces in February of 2009, the Chinese faction seized control, seizing most of the international assets from their Russian counterparts and establishing full independence and control from within China, primarily major business and senior government positions. Structure. The structure of the organization is the traditional White Tiger construction, designed from the start to be as punitive to the local populace as possible while still being sustainable. The senior leadership are an oligopoly, forming the highest-most groups. However, their subordinates are bound as much by pseudo-contracts as they are by direct control. This pattern cascades throughout the entire society, each unit functioning as an almost independent unit with a series of pseudo-contracts both up and down, binding them into a web of mafia society. There is no honor or bond associated with any of these contracts. Each contract is maintained by might makes right balance of power, where each party has the capability of inflicting sufficient damage on the other that violations of the contract are unprofitable. White Tiger was a grandmaster of this system, creating a web of contracts involving enforcement contracts on other contracts that forged forces almost indistinguishable from a unified force to the targets. No other has ever come close to his capabilities in this regard. Inside of these web of contracts, there is no consistency in behavior, ethic, or other unifying trait other than those baked into the structure of the system itself. Each unit defines a unique culture independent of the rest of the system. This is to the point that other mob groups, the Italians in particular, are often integrated in their original form with their original culture intact, with only their leadership responsible for payments and White Tiger pseudo-contracts. That being said, some common themes permeate the society. One of the original purposes of the system was to invert the status hierarchy of Russia. As such, those that create are the lowest members of society by definition and construction. Those that manage, control, and defend, especially by getting others to perform the work, are the highest of society. All but converted units of other groups maintain this absolutely. Levels. White Tiger groups have radically different behavior based on the level of control of the system in which they are operating. Payments are most closely correlated with risk, not any other factor. There exist 6 levels of domination. 0. No mafia presence at all. The establishment of a mole presence is a priority. 1. There is significant mole penetration of the community. Undercover torturers are in place to launch attacks, but preparations for launching these attacks are not complete. 2. Attacks on law enforcement and prosecution is underway with some, but not all, controlled. Similarly, the mental health system is under siege. This phase is where significant casualties are possible. 3. Control of enforcement and mental evaluations has been obtained. Prosecuting criminal activities is basically impossible, and the alternative criminal system is up and running. Open mafia activity begins during this stage. Before this stage, mafia activities require suicide rates, effectively preventing most behavior, including mafia stones. Top targets during this level are primarily company procurement and human resources personnel of the local businesses. Attacks on vulnerable, beautiful women for slave trading are routine at this stage, but not widespread. 4. Control of all employment in the area has been obtained, establishing with its significant money laundering capability. Door-by-door absorption of the populace is the primary objective during this phase. Those that sell and surrender quickly accept non-slave positions. Those that don't or have mafia money potential disproportional to their capacity to defend, such as poor women, are typically slave traded during this stage. This stage still maintains secrecy of operations at a societal level. 5. The society is completely controlled, with nearly all residents now participants in the system. Most are aware of this control, with nearly open statements of societal control almost common. 6. New human rights activists, external law enforcement, or others that must be discredited, not just destroyed, have their vicinity evacuated of all normal members, replaced by hit specialists chosen specifically to establish a local denouement of the target. The White Tiger Chinese Mob Value System. The society is extraordinarily possessive. Those that enter, enter forever, with literally the full force of the entire organization to force back any one member at any level that attempts to leave. Any owner, higher up in the mob, can call in a higher level owner to prevent the exit of any person. However, the person frequently has to answer to the higher authority for how it happens. This escalation continues until the leadership of the organization are launching attacks of entire regions of the mob to take entire governments just to recapture an escaped slave. I am the first person in the system to escape sufficiently to even document this system. White Tiger societies also have an unusual ethic where outright falsifications are almost always forbidden, subject to extreme punishment inside the system. However, interpretations are routinely fixed, often in obviously blatantly corrupt fashions. The less ridiculous the interpretation to be purchased, the less it costs to purchase individuals or groups to believe it. Once purchased, an interpretation is extremely expensive to change. Mafia marketing, where large groups of people are purchased to like and promote particular products for specific reasons, is common, often becoming adopted in non-mafia circles even as others shake their heads in disbelief at pop culture groupthink. Likewise, a judicial-like decision, making a final decision on a contract agreement of some type, becomes a battle of competing interpretation purchases. In this system, a judicial finding is explicitly by bribe, with ethics, a warped form of Christian ethics, being a multiplier on the money given, lobbying inside the society to obtain a better, or imposing a more onerous, multiplier as possible, but not aware of how common this is. The entire society is money-driven. Acquiring funds is the only measure of success, especially acquiring and maintaining a steady source of income that is defended from other mobsters. Especially in the Chinese branch, the amount of money defines the person's worth to others and access to anything else, including partners. Sexuality is a major coin in the society. People are relatively cheap compared to the value of steady money, so selling subordinate sexuality is routine, especially for women. Selling freedom from this forced prostitution is a major profit maker for most owners with successful woman subordinates. As a consequence of excessive supply, prostitution pays very poorly compared to its non-mafia counterparts. This is further obfuscated by mafia dating, where the excuse for a male subordinate to pay nearly everything from his owner's supplied job is to pay for the services of the woman that is sold to him. Frequently she works as well, also paying to the owner. In middle-class partnerships, the power between wife and husband can invert frequently, with the partner that is owner switching frequently. As partners are frequently a decision of an owner, traditional marriage vows are rare, and marriage is any long-term cohabitation agreement. Beyond inverting power to those that manage from those that create, especially those in science or other forms of intellectual property generation, traditional fame in the Russian sense is also inverted, as the primary purpose of the construction of the society was to desecrate the Soviet state as rapidly and completely as humanly possible. Any statement of worth in Soviet is explicitly denigrated in this society. As a result, all power in society is maintained in an alternate hierarchy independent of official power, with a shadow open government whose purpose is to be openly corrupt and not much else. Individuals in positions of power are routinely bound to engage in behavior indicative of the most corrupt stereotypes of the position. Police power, as a consequence, is maintained in a torturer network typically associated and owned by various different groups as powerful slaves, many handling establishing contract connections, if not the contracts themselves. An entire economic ecosystem surrounding the creation and distribution of torture equipment and supplies is associated with police hierarchy. Psychiatrists form the backbone of the judicial framework, providing judgment and punishments for most mafia criminal sentences. This is why mental health is typically struck simultaneously with police when a new area is taken. Mental hospitals provide the prison sentences for the system. Chinese torturers are an almost independent subsociety within the White Tiger system. The members are horrifically tortured and restored until the individuals have lost all traces of empathy. This process is so severe that algorithmic analysis of a torturer's facial reactions in a group should be able to identify members of this sub-society with great accuracy from their inability to fake normal human responses. Each torturer is required to like their torture. They cannot perform any act on another they do not act convincingly that they enjoy. This is derived from the philosophy of Chinese torture, that the purpose of torture is to humiliate a victim into accepting a lower place in life, lower than the torturer, which is already quite low, solving the problem the torturer was sent to solve. The implementation in the society of this Ming and Mongol dynasty holdovers is spotty at best, with some torturers gaining immense wealth, but in general holds. The torture society is the default ending place for any man that cannot meet financial obligations and slides into bankruptcy. While temporarily much wealthier, the life expectancy of new torturers is exceptionally short. Women that fall short of financial obligations typically become slaves, sentenced forever to appease others' wants. This process is not as permanent as those inside believe. Finding a way to make enough money to buy one's way out is not uncommon when assigned to a low-level partner with limited income. The initial torture break to enter slavery is horrific, but many recover almost completely over time. Those slaves sentenced for whatever reason to a more deep level of slavery experience a more complete erasure of identity that is much more permanent. Professionals that are unable to beat mafia stones also enter this category, sold as much for the money as for what else they can do, especially men. Sales to gay men of other men exist, but supply so exceeds demand that it is rare that a victim enters this state. Tiger internal discipline. One of the major cultural phenomenons of the society are mafia stones, frequently shorted to stones. Stones are permanent punishments assigned by another to ensure the person never forgets their place in society. At least one stone is required for entry to the system. The strength of one entry is often determined by the stone. Some are designed to reward more than punish. There exists an entire culture around these stones. Each person is required to maintain these stones by themselves by any means necessary. For those with horrific stones, like mandatory rape every 24 hours, this can be suicidal but is required anyways. Horrific punishments by a specific group of torturers that specialize in the selling and maintaining of mafia stones are the norm. Payments for stones are typically a one-off payment. Furthermore, all other individuals are required under threat of torture to provide the means to complete a mafia stone by any means necessary, though extraction of arbitrary resources for the privileged is customary and routine for those in danger of being in arrears of one stone. For those within mandatory daily fine wine or expensive whiskey stones, this can seem much less a punishment until the extreme payments and shortages are recorded. Stones are routine after losing a mafia battle or receiving a severe disciplining from an owner, and are usually connected to the reason the person is in trouble, requiring the symptoms of rebellion be made a permanent part of one's life. An example of this is a requirement for a woman to always have sex with a potential partner she wishes to have at first blush. The lightest stone I have seen is not being permitted any wine less than a certain cost. I have acquired a number of these stones. Always having soured milk, daily rape by men and women, non-caffeinated coffee, always having non-alcoholic beverages, all computing devices must be hacked, etc. I tried to collect these stones, each one a purchase of substantial sums, varying by the stone, from a licensed seller of mafia stones, that must then spend money to compel or torture those that defy their stones. Officially permanent no matter what, after a sufficient number of mafia personnel have gone bankrupt attempting to maintain the stone, it is possible to get the stone ground to powder. This is heavily suppressed within the organization, as the possibility of accomplishing this is extremely detrimental to the very structure of the system. My view on stones are a way of getting perfectly sane criminal mobsters to stand up and announce their crimes to authorities. The criminal system has multiple levels. Minor disagreements and minor offenses, the same thing in most circumstances, are handled by torturers utilizing poison and occasionally sexual assault. Should the person go under financially and not break, or if the person breaks badly, the person could be referred to a mental hospital for a mob sentence, a stone, and get the equivalent of a mob felony. If the person breaks and is deemed worth more as a slave than as a punishment receptacle or worker, they are then sold to a slave trader for slave trading. Breaking punishment is then applied until complete break and complete control is obtained by a Chinese torturer. If the person violates slave conditioning, they are retrained, sometimes to a deeper level of identity erasure. Occasionally, a slave owner will decide a slave must be made an example of to maintain discipline among the other slaves. Special at-home only torturers specializing in extreme sadism are then deployed to destroy the person completely, often resulting in the person's death. This final endpoint can also be reached after repeated mental hospital visits. White Tiger money laundering traditions. Money laundering is the first system set up after seizing control of prosecutions in an area. In this system, an individual notifies an authority that payments of a certain size are being redirected to a particular individual. Services are then purchased at a deliberately high price. The difference between real price and actual price is the size of the payment. These payments run through sequences of individuals, sometimes as many as 15 sequential operations. Costs are usually quite small, only 0.1% of the transferred money per stage of the transactions. This money laundering implies that certain types of bad investments make a particularly lucrative way to make large debts in the system. Whether this is deliberately participating in a pyramid scheme or funding a startup company explicitly for it to spend itself bankrupt, this money can then be redistributed to the intended recipients in a nearly traceless manner. Hacker protection rackets are a particular form of payment systems closely associated with the Russian mob, Russian Federation-based crime syndicate. Despite horrific hatred between these groups, they have extensive web of contracts back and forth, particularly in the black market IP system. This other group runs and polices the contracts for the various IP racket monopolies. When hacking a company under the contract system, the targets have key components damaged to perform badly. Alternative software, usually vastly inferior, are then offered to the targets with explanations claiming the damaged technologies are universally broken and inefficient. These software packages are extremely expensive, providing substantial mob payments to otherwise non-mafia victim companies, paying hackers for allowing basic company services to operate. Substantial software development in these alternatives exist in the system, particularly from Chinese sources. White Tiger police and other public servants. As part of desecrating the state, certain positions have traditional mafia stones. Police routinely help people, so routinely having stones requiring daily sex. Typically, there is a standing agreement with a brothel to provide this. Payments for prosecution are made to the brothel, providing free sex for the officers, preventing them from spending this out of pocket. This is to encourage officers to engage in corrupt behavior to get payments to prevent bankruptcy from sex purchases. As part of the philosophy that power is invertly related to work performed, powerful researchers and political positions usually have mafia stones. They are forbidden to produce their own work and must buy it from someone else, paid for from corruption in their position. This also applies to research positions above a certain pay grade, especially government researchers. Individuals in these positions are required to never utilize their own work and routinely are strongly encouraged to not perform anything but unrelated mafia duties to provide the funds that they use to buy the research they then publish. This is especially severe for captured research centers, where forbidding public disclosure of anything produced at the center is a routine mafia stone, applied quite deeply in captured research centers. White Tiger slavery rules and regulations. Slavery is extremely common in White Tiger Chinese mafia societies. As many as 10 to 20% of the mafia population is in a state of slavery at any given time. Sale of these individuals is typically inside a single mafia group. More rarely, individuals are sold internal to the area in a cross-group exchange. These individuals are often professional individuals of either extreme non-sex worth, such as programmers, or exceptionally talented or beautiful. Only a tiny fraction of those in slavery are sold outside the area, especially to non-mafia. These percentages vary greatly by region. Asia, China in particular, selling slave-traded women overseas is one of the primary black market exports of these regions. North America or Europe, these percentages are much lower. Sales between groups vary by method, but currently utilize dating sites to perform matches. Individuals for sale have a profile on the site with specific cues in the online pictures and the online descriptions that give indications of the person's slave status and current level of break. Individuals browsing to deliver brokers via money laundering the sufficient amount of money to purchase the relationship they want from the target on the dating site. The individual is then approached by the purchased, possibly vice versa, and the excuse for the meeting is arranged. The true nature of the relationship begins as soon as the door closes, with some surprises for the woman in particular, unaware that the man they just picked up bought from an owner they didn't know they had, particularly harsh relationship conditions, that they then get cheap multiples on torture services to compel adherence to the contract the owner signed. One social quirk is the mandatory forgiveness of a slave freed by another, provided he/she has sex with her savior promptly. He/she is forgiven for the death of the owner, but is otherwise held as a possible revenge target. This is a part of the system of make traditional anti-human traffic work particularly difficult and deadly for those that practice it outside the mafia exploitation framework. Indie music industry, White Tiger theory applied. Each individual processing unit is independent, but often consists of a stable of artist performers and slaves for backup performances. Artists usually, but not always, are those that are most successful in obtaining sufficient income from their art to pay mob debts. Slaves can be from the music industry, but are more often individuals from music conservatories that were forced into slavery after not paying bills during a hostile pickup. Producers are often independent of the artist groups that hire them, along with the independence for add-on services such as music video creation. Payments are made to owners in the system by a variety of means, but extensive charity work with registered charities are the most common. As is usual, the charity may even be legitimate, but a substantial percentage of the money the charity spends is spent in a manner furthering money laundering purchases, such as salaries for support staff and use of mafia firms for purchasing goods. The producer in this case is an independent with only a small number of slaves associated with the operation and no subordinate artists. In my own experience, an owner has a substantial stable of artists that are not slaves by mob standards, which operate in the mob through him to his owner and are responsible for timely delivery of substantial payments to prevent a descent into slavery to recover costs. It is expected this owner is Agent Michelangelo, mentioned in previous FBI tips involving stealing my identity, and this ownership is a fairly recent transfer. The break in this case came from an attempt from the owner to pimp a backup singer during a stage performance, where I placed $30 in their charity from a tracer money. I have been since registered as having payments redirected to the singer until further notice towards buying her. Slaves are typically individuals, often women, who are required from music schools, typically in classical music performance, that provide extremely low-cost services for auxiliary musical assistance to musicians in an owner's stable. Their services are for sale, sexual or otherwise, with all proceeds going to the owner. Artists, especially female artists, also surrender their sexuality to their owner, but in general have control of their own finances and can make independent financial deals from their owner without approval, provided they maintain payments. Each of these different groups are often associated with each other in collaborations, forming a web of indie music groups with similar audience overlaps as well. Ally groups often share charities as well, forming additional ties between these mafia groups. Most of the festivals these artist groups are associated with are exclusively mafia as well, forming additional opportunities for linkage. Payments to owners are an exceptionally large percentage of income for artists, as a significant percentage of their income is considered to be in their fame and name recognition. White Tiger, theory applied, human rights groups. White Tiger rapidly found his society unstable by the most horrific evil upon construction. His solution was to authorize traditional human rights groups and other extra-government authorities to identify the worst evil in society and eliminate it, placing curbs on the evil as a whole. However, unrestricted anti-mafia activity also destabilized the society. The end result is the establishment of anti-mafia. Each anti-mafia group accepts bribes from the community as a contract killer groups. Each time they assassinate by traditional human rights activities a target in society, they must pay the owner of that person the money equivalent of the person. This value is somewhat negotiable by traditional White Tiger judicial means. So long as the price is paid, the activity does not bring retaliation against the organization. Some human rights groups are owned outright, others are owned only in the branches that operate inside of the controlled territories. Establishing control of new human rights infiltrators, bringing them into the contract killer system, is the number one objective of a local authority.